Table manners. Simplified speech 166. So Suzanne, today our topic is table manners. Why don't we start our conversation off by talking about some of the common table manners that we follow in North America? Of course, you and I, we are both North Americans, right? I'm Canadian, you're American, and I think our table manners are pretty much exactly the same in the two countries. I mean, at least when I visited America, I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. At least when I visited America, I've never noticed anything that's really different. I've never noticed anything that's really different. I've noticed anything difference. I've never not I've never noticed anything that's really different. I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. I've never noticed that I've never noticed anything I've never noticed I've never noticed anything that's really different in regard to table manners. In regard to table manners. But Suzanne, you've visited in both countries. you've lived in both countries, so maybe you have. Would you say they are pretty much exactly the same in that regard? Would you say, or maybe you have, would you say they are pretty much exactly the same? Would you say they are pretty much exactly the same in that regard? Yeah, I really do think so. I think everyone washes their hands for sandwiches and things we use our hands, but for the most part, we use forks and knives and things like that, napkins. So it's really generally the same, I would say. For the most part, 대부분. For the most part, for the most part, we use forks and knives and things like that, napkins. So it's really generally the same. It's really generally the same, I would say. Yeah, I agree. I haven't noticed any differences in regard to table manners between Canada and the USA. I haven't noticed any differences in regard to table manners between Canada and the USA. I haven't noticed any differences in regard to table manners between Canada and the USA. I've never I haven't I haven't noticed I haven't noticed I haven't noticed any differences in regard to table manners between Canada and the USA. But that's not to say that there aren't some differences from other countries, right? But that's not to say 뭐라고 하는 건 아니야. 그렇다고 다른 나라랑 차이점이 없다는 건 아니지. But that's not to say that there aren't some differences from other countries, right? But that's not to say there aren't some differences from other countries, right? I know in Europe and Asia and Africa and India, all of all of these places have different etiquette and different rules around eating and what is polite and what is considered rude. So maybe we will start to just because we do have a global audience. We have listeners from all over the place. So maybe we should talk a little bit about what is polite in our culture, Sudan. So, what kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? So, what kind of table manners come to your mind? Come to mind. 어떤 게 테이블 매너로 떠올라? What kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? So, what kind of table manners come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of food come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of books come to mind when you think of this topic? 어떤 게 떠올라? 어떤 책이 떠올라? 이 토픽을 다뤘을 생각할 때 어떤 책이 떠올라? What kind of instrument come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of games come to mind when you think of this topic? What kind of podcasts come to mind when you think of this topic? What pops into your head? What pops into your mind? What pops into your head? What pops into your mind? What pops into your mind? What pops into your head? Well, definitely making sure that you wash your hands before you eat, or that you before you come to a table. Maybe you're meeting a friend for dinner at a restaurant. I tend to excuse myself and say, you know what? I'm just gonna wash my hands real quick and make sure that I don't bring maybe the metro or whatever else I touched on the table. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. 코로나를 겪으면서 손을 청결하게 하는 게 얼마나 중요한지 인식이 된 것 같아. I think that also going through the pandemic. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. I think that also going through the pandemic really helped to empathize having clean hands. So that's definitely something that we do here, and people do put like the napkin or paper towel or whatever they give you on their laps a lot of times. Not everybody, but it's pretty common that it's really common that people put things on their lap to protect their clothes. And just to kind of make sure that you don't drop any spaghetti sauce or anything like that on your lap. Just to kind of make sure that you don't drop any spaghetti sauce on or anything like that on your lap. Yeah, especially someone like me who is kind of a messy eater. That is a must. Yeah, especially someone like me who is kind of a messy eater. That is a must. 그건 필수품이지. 그럼 냅킨 같은 건 필수품이야. Yeah, especially someone like me who is kind of a mess eater, who is kind of a mess eater. Yeah, especially someone who liked 기다 같은 사람은 특히 나같이 무모한 사람은 yeah, especially especially someone like me. Someone like me. 나 같은 사람. Someone like me. Yeah, especially someone like me who is kind of a mess eater. Who is kind of a mess eater. That is a must. 그게 필수품이지. I need to do that for sure. But I have to say that when it comes to putting a napkin or something on my lap, I usually only would do that at a restaurant. I don't usually do that at home. Do you ever do that at home? No, I don't. And I see people wear aprons like while they're cooking. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. No, I don't, I see people wear aprons like while they are cooking. I say that because I'm a messy cooker. I definitely splatter things and spill while I'm cooking because I just really love cooking and I get in the zone. I get in the zone. I get in the zone and I don't really think about all of the mess. I don't really think about all of the mess that is happening. And I see people wearing aprons at home and I don't do that. And I have them and I should use them and I think I would be a lot happier because I wouldn't splatter my clothes as much. But I don't use napkins on my lap at home. Okay, and it's funny that you're talking about being a messy cooker. 너무 신기하다. 웃긴다. funny에 이상하다는 뜻이구나. And it's funny that you're talking about being a messy cooker. 좀 지저분하게 요리하는 거에 대해서 얘기를 하는 게 너무 신기해. It's funny that you were talking about being a messy cooker. I'm just actually had to throw out a couple of t-shirts because they got stained when I was cooking at home, and I was saying to my wife, I need to buy an apron because I guess I'm also a messy cooker. I'm just actually had to throw out. I just actually had to throw out a couple of t-shirts because they got stained. They got stained when I was cooking at home. 집에서 요리할 때 뭐가 묻었어. Because they got stained when I was cooking at home, and I was saying to my wife, I need to buy an apron because I guess I'm also a messy cooker. I was saying to my wife, I need to buy an apron because I guess I'm also a messy cooker. It's funny that you were talking about being a messy cooker. I just actually had to throw out a couple of t-shirts because they got stained while I'm cooking. They got stained when I was cooking at home, and I was saying to my wife, I need to buy an apron because I guess I'm also a messy cooker and I could protect and save my clothes. And I could protect and save my clothes. So it's just kind of funny that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that the other day as well. It's just kind of funny that you brought that up. 그 말을 꺼내다니 너무 신기해. It's just it's just kind of it's just kind of funny that you brought that up. That you brought that up. Brought that up. It's just kind of funny that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about that the other day as well. It's just kind of funny that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that the other day as well. Suzanne, one thing also that you said that kind of sparked a thought in my head was about washing your hands before coming to the table. Suzanne, one thing also that you said that kind of sparked a thought in my head was about washing your hands before coming to the table. Many listeners will know that I live in South Korea, and one thing that they do here, one thing that they do here in South Korea, which I really love, is they always give you a wet tissue when you come. They call it water tissue in Korean language. I don't know exactly what we would call it in English. Maybe a wet wipe. They give you like a wet wipe. When you come to the table to wash your hands at the table, I haven't really noticed too many restaurants in Canada that do that. But I think it's a great idea, and it just is a nice way to make sure that you are speak and span before you enjoy your meal. Many listeners will know that I live in South Korea, and one thing that they do here in South Korea, one thing that they do, one thing that they do in one thing that they do here in South Korea, which I really love is they always give you a wet tissue. They always give you a wet tissue. Give you a wet tissue. When you come, always give you a wet tissue when you come. They call it water tissue in Korean language. I don't know exactly. I don't know. I don't know exactly what we would call it. What we would call it in English. Maybe it's a wet wipe. I don't know exactly what we would call it. I don't know exactly what we would call it in English. Maybe a wet wipe. They give you like a wet wipe when you come to the table. When you come to the table to wash your hands at the table. When you come to the table to wash your hands at the table. I haven't really noticed too many restaurants in Canada that I haven't really noticed too many restaurants in Canada that do that. But I think it's a great idea, and it just is a nice way to make sure that you are speak and span before you enjoy your meal. That's wonderful. I remember my grandmother actually keeping some of those in her purse and handing them to us as kids because kids have dirty hands most of the time. Most of the time. Most of the time. Most of the time. 어디서 봤는데? No, for the most part, no. For the most part. For the most part. Most of the time. For the most part. Most of the time. So yeah, that seems like a really good idea to kind of, that seems like, oh my god, a really good idea. That seems like a really good idea to kind of keep it in your bag. So yeah, that seems like a really good idea to keep it in your bag or your backpack, just in case. Just in case. Especially if you're traveling or on a backpacking trip somewhere, that could be a really good thing to take with you. That could be a really good thing to take with you. When I think about table manners, the first thing that pops into my head is about how you actually deal with the food when you are putting it into your mouth. So, like when you're chewing and how you essentially behave when you've got food in your mouth, right? Like that part of the eating process. So, big no-nos in my opinion for like being polite at the table, at the dinner table, is never to chew with your mouth open, right? So, big no-nos in my opinion for like being polite at the dinner table is never to chew with your mouth open, right? So big no-no is never to chew, is never to chew, is never to chew with your mouth open, with your mouth open. So big no-nos, in my opinion, for being polite at the dinner table is never to chew with your mouth open, right? You want to keep your mouth closed so that you're not showing people what's inside your mouth. So that you're not showing people what's inside your mouth. And also, you don't want to be like loud, right? And also you don't want to be loud, right? You don't want to be loud, right? That sounds that comes out of people's mouth, and that sounds that comes out of people's mouth when they chew with their mouths open, it's really just gross, right? It's gross. And also one thing that can help with that is to not talk while your mouth is full, right? So if you take a bite, and then someone asks you a question, it can be challenging. Maybe you say like, Just 1 second. And you're finished chewing, and then you can answer their question. You're finished, and you're finished chewing, and you can answer their question because especially if you're out to dinner at a rest restaurant restaurant you are there probably to have conversation, so you have to kind of time your conversation around your bites of food. So you have to kind of time your conversation around your bites of food so that you don't spit any food out onto the table. So that 그래요? So that you don't spit any food out onto the table. Spit any food out onto the table. Spit any food out onto the table. So that you don't spit any food out onto the table. Yeah, and another thing, Suzanne, is slurping. When you're eating your food, right? Like if you're eating pasta or noodles or soup or something, in general, we want to try and keep the noises down. That's considered to be polite table manners in Canada. That's considered to be polite table manners in Canada. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, Andrew, do you ever lift up your bowl to finish the end of your soup? Do you ever lift up your bowl to finish the end of your soup or drink the end of your soup? Is that something that you do? Yes, but okay, this actually comes into the different table manners when you're in public and table manners when you're at home, because I think at home I definitely do that, and I've lived in Korea for so long that I sometimes just go by the Korean way of doing things, and that's not like super rude to do that in Korea. Like I see people do that. And I was at a restaurant yesterday meeting my friends for lunch, and we had a little bowl of soup that was on the side with our main meal, and they didn't even give us a spoon, or they were there weren't spoons on the table. You were just expect to drink that little cup of soup right from the little bowl that it came with. So I do it at home, and I do it sometimes in Korea, but it's really like restaurant specific, and I think if I were in Canada, maybe I wouldn't do that. If I were at a nicer restaurant, I would think that's a little bit too much. Yeah, I hear you. I guess it depends on the restaurant. I asked because it's not something I ever did at home or in public, but Olivier, my partner, he does it. And they do that in France. And sometimes he does that in a restaurant as well. And I just always watch him like, I never do that. But I think it's fine. It's great. I kind of means like, I love it so much. I want to get every last drop. It's great. It kind of means like, I love it so much. I want to get every last drop. And it was just a question because it was something I noticed that I was not used to, but that seems totally acceptable. It was just it was just a question. It was just a question. 그냥 물어본 거야. It was just a question because it was something I noticed that I was not used to, but that seems totally acceptable. 받아들일 수는 I like what you just said there, and that is that when you drink your soup, and especially I think we do this at the end, right? When it gets hard to scoop up the soup with your spoon, usually that's when you start drinking it. It's not often that you get like a big hot steaming bowl of soup and just drink it right away. But when you're towards the end, I like what you just said there. And there is that when you drink your soup, and especially I think we do this at the end, right? When it gets hard to scoop up the soup, with your spoon, right? When it gets hard to scoop up the soup with your spoon, usually that's when you start drinking it. It's not often that you get like a big hot steaming bowl of soup and just drink it right away. But when you're towards the end, and 다 먹어갈 때. 어떡하지? When you're towards the end and it's more convenient to drink it, it does show that you enjoy it, right? You're like really enjoying your meal, and that's something that I've noticed in Korea. There are some slight differences about what's polite at the table and what's rude at the table. And I think in both cultures, generally, you don't want to make too much noise or be disgusting with your eating. But I've noticed here in Korea that if people are eating a little bit louder or like slurping their noodles or maybe drinking their soup or something like that, it's kind of showing that you really are enjoying your meal. And people will comment like, wow, this guy is like really enjoying his food. Like it must be so delicious. So yeah, it's just like a different viewpoint, but it's interesting. And that's fascinating to hear that they do that in France as well. Yeah, I think similar to my family. Yeah, I think similar to my family, my Italian family, if you're eating it kind of fast, then it means that you're really enjoying it, right? Like it's so good. You want to really just devour it. Whereas when I go to France, for example, they eat very slow. They take a bite, put down their fork and knife, chew it. Maybe look at you, listen to a story, take another bite, and put down. Yeah, it's very slow, and that was something that I was surprised at when I first went to France and ate out a dinner, or even at my mother-in-law's house. I was very surprised at how slow people ate, and they don't have large portions. So they are really savoring each bite. in a smaller amount and in a slower pace. That's probably a much better way to eat in terms of like digesting your food properly and not overeating. I could also see that being a being a little bit uncomfortable. Like if you're meeting your partner's parents for the first time or something like that, and you had to eat really slowly, like these tiny little bites and get the food down slowly depending on the social arrangement of the dinner party. It could be very more awkward, but I think, yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I would think that's a healthier way to eat than, sometimes the way that we do in North America, where we just eat a lot and we eat quickly. It's true, and I noticed also something different about the French culture when we are out to dinner, because my family is American and Olivia's family is French, and we've had some instances over the past year where we've been together at dinner, and I noticed that they wait until everyone gets their food at a restaurant to begin eating. I noticed that they wait until everyone gets their food at a restaurant to begin eating. And this is not something that is in all of North America as far as a culture happening. Like most of us don't wait until everyone is served because the food is hot, and so we kind of go for it and just start eating. But with the French people, they tend to wait till everyone is served, even if they were waiting like 5, 6, 10 minutes. So it can be a little shocking if you're like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have taken that bite. Sorry about that, everybody. Sorry. So sorry about that, everybody. If your food comes out first, then you might be put in a different situation. If your food comes out first, then you might be put in a difficult situation. Put you might be put in a difficult situation. Totally. Now you can pick on your French fries. That's okay. Oh, it's just like can't dive into the main course. Totally, that's it. That's what I noticed. So that's interesting because personally, maybe this was just like my family, but we always follow that kind of same system where we'd wait for everybody's food to be served, and it was always considered to be a little bit rude to jump in and start eating. Usually in that situation, the other people will feel kind of burdened that they are making you wait. So they will say, "Oh, just go ahead, like tuck in. You don't have to wait for me." But without that permission of the other person, then it's always felt a little bit rude. So I've always followed that as well. But that's caused some problem for me now that I'm living in Korea. Because I usually in Korea, it's like the it's like the head of the family or maybe the head of a company, whoever is like the top dog in the line of command. Once they start eating, then you can start eating. So for example, when I meet with my wife's family, it's my father-in-law. He is kind of the head of the household. So once he starts eating, well, then we can follow after him. But often what happens when I go for dinner at my mother-in-law's place, my at my in-laws' place, But often, what happens when I go for dinner at my in law's place is that my mother in law will always be just busy in the kitchen and she won't sit down at the table. She will still be like cooking and bringing food to the table and that kind of thing. And my father-in-law will just start eating and then I'm put it I'm put it in a difficult place because I think it's kind of rude to start eating when my mother-in-law is still like cooking and preparing things. So I feel like I need to wait for her, but then my father-in-law will tell me, "Start eating. Come on, let's go." So I'm kind of stuck in the middle of like my culture and Korean culture, and I don't know what is best to do. But obviously, since I'm in Korea, I like to follow the Korean rules, even though that gives me a slightly uncomfortable feeling. Yeah, I just thought of an idea. You could jump up and say, "Here, let me help you." And then maybe you can help her get to the table faster. So then believe me, I've tried and that doesn't fly either. I just get shooed away very quickly, but I like your thinking and I like that idea. Yeah, Suzanne, how do you feel about technology at the table? Yeah, Suzanne, how do you feel about technology at the table? Oh, wow, good question. It's interesting because I think with the pandemic, a lot of restaurants had menus that are QR codes. So you needed your phone out, and some still do that. Where we went to a restaurant last week, where we needed to have our phones out in order to look at the menu, and I don't love it. I kind of like keeping my phone away while I'm eating just to have a break from the notifications and the distractions. How about you, Andrew? What do you think? It's interesting that you brought that up. It's interesting. It's funny that. It's interesting that. It's interesting that you brought that up because I was recently back in Canada and I noticed that at restaurants that suddenly on the table there are these QR codes and some restaurants won't give you a menu anymore. They just expect you to open the menu on your phone with the QR code and I didn't love that. It felt a little impersonal. I didn't love that. It felt a little bit impersonal to me. Like it's nicer for the server to come and greet you and say hello and give you the menu. And also, you've got a very good point there that it kind of forces you to take your phone out and deal with your phone right from the start, right? So if everybody in your party is taking out their phones and all looking at the menu, well then you're not really having a social interaction with each other. So I can see how that could be handy from the restaurant's perspective, but from my perspective, it's not that great. Um, in general, I think that's just a really rude thing to do. I think that's just a really rude thing to do is be glued to your phone while you're dining with someone else. So I always try as best as I can not to look at my phone. I am I'm not perfect about that and especially when your phone's in your pocket. When your phone is in your pocket and you feel it vibrate and you've got a new message like it's really tempting, but yeah, as much as I can I try to leave my phone away from the table so it's not bothering me. And when I eat at home I usually just put my phone like in the bedroom or something while I'm eating dinner so that I can have a conversation with my wife. It's like a really good time to connect and to speak with each other is when we are eating dinner or lunch together. So I try my best not to be one of those people that just eats and looks at their phones the whole time. Yeah, Olivia and I are not so good at keeping our phones away during dinner at home. Sometimes it's hanging out a little bit. It's hanging out a little bit, but usually it's in the other room, at least. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it is on the table near us, and it's like, oh, don't look at it, you know? So I hear you, but we usually watch a show like it's the only time we really watch TV is when we eat, which I realize is also just another kind of screen. And in a way, yes, we're connecting because we're both like laughing or looking at each other and giggling about the show or whatever. But we're not talking about maybe a topic we need to talk about, like a project we're working on or a plan we want to put in action together. So yes, it's not the best. That habit that habit is not a good table manner habit.